before. This says go to the frame set file, where you'll find we've got this loc strings variable defined, and use the dev portion of loc strings. So this then will pull in the company name for the OEM, for the specific OEM. So here we have let them eat cake or take the cake. And so we can see some of this actually in action. Here. So here we have some output from this help file. And so we can see it's a standard live help file. But the important thing to notice is here we have our title, let them eat cake. And so this text actually was pulled in dynamically when I reloaded the page. So if we wanted to add if we wanted to change this for the other OEM, we could say oper equals OEM B. And now if I hit carriage return, you notice that our name changed from let them eat cake to now take the cake. So this is actual dynamic text replacement. And we can see this also in our introduction. We have, here's my text, take the cake. So here's just a regular standard old page, and we have take the cake. So let's take a look. Actually, it's worthwhile, I think, to see that then in the actual JavaScript. So I could have opened this up I could have opened it up straight, but you can see here's the JavaScript that we have. So here's the text, here's a paragraph, here's my text, and here we have it live, just as you saw on the slide. We have script, document write, top loc strings, display name. And actually that's what I used for, rather than the slide says dev, which is not so good, this makes a lot more sense. This is says display name, and so we pulled in what we assigned to display name. All right. So let's take a look at the DITA that actually generated this. And if you just give me a minute, I realize I have to open that file. Bear with me. So as I said, in the DITA, for the replaceable text, what we use is the phrase attribute. And so in this case, we have phrase, other props, dev. And so what we were able to do, this says, and in some ways this is bad practice. What we really should have done is made sure that the dev, rather than dev, we actually use the string display name, and that way it would be equivalent. But what happens here now is, so the dev here in our DITA file actually indicates which specific thing we want. Now let's take a look how we're going to then map that dev to the display name, and actually how we could have changed that so that instead of saying dev, we could say, I'm going out on a limb here, we actually could say the product. Let's see, what was it I called that? This frame, view frame source. So we had display name there. Let me pull this off to the side. As I say here, the PH phrase is typically used for replaceable text in like conrefs, and in this case we use the other props attribute to indicate the text. So how then do we do this in the XSL? How do we get from dev or display name or whatever we want in the XSL. How do we get from that to the display name being appearing in our HTML file? Well, as I say, we did some customization in the DITA Open Toolkit. We modified the file DITA to HTML impl.xsl. And what we did was we said, when we're handling the PH or phrase element, so we had to look for classes, topic, PH, replace that PH with when test other props equals dev, then document, well, let's rather read it. So essentially what we're doing is we're testing and we're seeing if the other props attribute is used in the phrase, then and the other props has the string dev, then insert the string script document write top look strings dev. So let's just take a look at that in practice. And you can see where we went astray. As you notice here, this is actually a much larger one because we're replacing several different pieces of information. So we had a URL, hotline, a short dial name, we had an email address, cost, and here we have our dev. And so what we're doing here is fairly rote, maybe time consuming. For every PH, we know that there are these possible other props values. And when other props is dev, and as I was saying, dev's perhaps not desirable, display name would be better. We can then also make sure that here, other than our other props, we could actually say display name. So this makes much more sense. So now we're saying, here's our phrase, and we're saying other props is we want the display name displayed here. And this is it's always good to choose these names so that your writers are able to get the sense of what it is that's going to be substituted in that place. Now, this approach, this is a fairly safe approach because what we can do is at the bottom of this choose, we could then actually do an otherwise and emit an error message as part of the DITA Open Toolkit processing and say, I don't recognize that other props name. So that could have been added here. Now, as I was looking at it, I also realized there was one more thing we could have done, or another approach we could have done. Instead of hard coding this, when we do script document write top look strings dev, or now we say display name, instead of the top look strings dev, what we actually could have done is we could have just said concat, so this is the XSL to build a string. We want to take top look strings and then concatenate to it whatever the value of other props is. So if this is dev, then this would be top look strings.dev. If it's other props, if it's display name, then display name would get substituted in there. So this is good if you've got a large number of these things, and so you don't want to have to code up this large choose statement to have to choose each one. The downside, of course, is that there's no checking. So if the writer makes a typo, if the writer makes an error when coding up the DITA input, then there's no way that you can report that error onto users. Now I need to make a slight change here to cover because we've made this change. Hang on a second to make sure this comes in right. Oh, that's right. That'll work. All right. So changing gears a little bit, let's take a look at some images and how we handle that. Now, the images, as I said earlier, the images we didn't have to worry about quite so much because there was just a single image we had to worry about, and that's just the cover image here. In my example, we've got cake,